Welcome to another edition of Faithful Questions. Good to see everybody online this evening. I think actually in a rare moment, you guys online have the room outnumbered. So good to see you online and good to see those of you who made the effort to be here in person. Let's start with the prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together and for the technology that makes this possible. We ask you to be with us as we continue our journey through Holy Week and as we reflect on how we are to forgive as you forgave all of us through your sacrifice on the cross. Help us to better emulate the love that you have for us. We ask all of this through Christ our Lord and Savior. Amen. Okay, so our topic this evening is how should I react when others sin? And we're actually going to take two very different tacks to this. We're going to, on one level, we're just going to talk about the idea of what's happening when they sin, and then we're also going to talk about after they've sinned, how we can be agents of evangelization. We've now gotten past the sin, and now we're trying to be good to them. So we're going to talk about all of that. So obviously, we're going to start with the importance of forgiveness. We're going to spend some time specifically talking about when the sins have affected us, that they have done wrong by us. We're going to talk about changing our attitude of learning how to reform how we look at people through that. Then we'll have our normal intermission, and then afterwards, we're going to talk about once people have gotten to that place that they've started to accept the idea of forgiveness, what some of their objections might be to coming closer to Christ, and then how we have to treat different types of people differently. So we'll talk about the difference between how we address a stranger, how we address an acquaintance or maybe a coworker, so a family member who's not that close versus a close family member, and all of that. So that's the plan for this evening. First thing to get over, of course, is to talk about how to ask a question. For those of you here in person, feel free to raise your hand at any point. There are going to be a couple times specifically where we set aside for questions. But all I ask is if you do ask a question, you wait for me to bring you the microphone, because everybody online cannot hear you unless you wait for the microphone. And then when you get the microphone, you need to hold it really close. Like if you think of it like your job is to get COVID from the person who had it before. You want that thing right up in your mouth because the mics are designed not to get the feedback from the room, and so that needs to be really, really close. And then when you're done, hand the mic back so you can give COVID to the next person. For those of you online, don't have to worry about that, but here's how you can ask a question. You can get logged in on YouTube. Most people these days are, but if you're not, if you're somehow truly anonymous on your web browser, congrats. It's hard to do, but for this, you'll want to be logged in so that it opens up the comment section, and then you'll see the live comments. And just go ahead and write your question in there to let us know that it's a question as opposed to you just commenting that, whatever, you don't like the color of my shirt. Just prefix it with Deacon question in all capitals so that we know it's going to be asked. But just know that the live stream is, although close to live, it's like a minute and a half behind. So we won't be able to answer that question immediately. It may be a couple minutes before we even see it. And then, of course, the timing of things may make it even a little bit longer. So be patient. We'll get to you. If for some reason, again, you cannot get logged in, you can't do anything, we do have an open chat room at deaconken.org/blog/chat. Feel free to comment there if you can't get in on YouTube. Okay, so let's talk about forgiveness. The number one answer of how we deal when people sin is we make a movement towards forgiveness. The biggest mistake we make is we don't want to forgive. There are lots of different reasons for this, and we're going to go through some of them, but we generally very much struggle with the importance of forgiving. We're great when it's us. Actually, there are certain cases in which that's not true, but as a general rule, we're much more willing to consider forgiveness for ourselves, but we really struggle with the idea that others may deserve the same thing. God is ready to forgive everyone for their sins. And if you take the attitude of what we most want for everybody is for them first to recognize that they've done something wrong, next, desire forgiveness for that, and then finally to transform their lives to live as Christ would have them live. That's the game plan that we would have for everyone who is sinning. So many of our excuses of why we don't want to forgive do not take into account that this is the game plan, that this is what we want for them. We instead want to see them not make progress, or maybe we're fearful that they would. We just don't trust that they ever would, and so the downside, the potential upsides are so remote we don't consider them, and so we're just not willing to help them down that road. But the reality is the only way, and yes, there are plenty of times where it's not going to work, but the only way it will work is if we are people who are forgiving the same way God was forgiving to us. The real reality is when people sin, they know not what they do. Christ said that so well. It's such an important line. When people truly understand the nature of their sin, they will desire change. There's lots of reasons they may not yet understand it. There are reasons that they think it's justified, which is a different way of saying they don't understand it. And so our job is to help them understand. But to do that, they have to see this pathway for themselves where it's worth it. And so here's one of the biggest things possible, or that's important, is if you take two people, or you imagine the same person in two different situations maybe. Situation number one, you tell them you're in trouble. Here is a path to getting out of trouble. And then you take that same person who did the same set of things and you say, you're in trouble. That's it for you. There will never be a path for redemption. It doesn't matter how much you beg, plead, ask, desire, want, whatever. There is no path in which you will ever recover from what has happened. Does that person ever desire change? Of course they don't. No, they're going to be like, well, if I'm already off the end of the scale to where there will never be hope, well, there will never be redemption, what's the point? Why would I try if there's no hope for me? So redemption is so critical to people wanting to change. And redemption can come in a lot of different ways. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But people will only start making movements in the right direction if they believe a path to redemption is possible. And that is why so many of the things that even just our society tries to do, right? The idea of we really don't put people in jail for the rest of their lives unless we absolutely have to. Even if they're going to be in jail for 30 or 40 years, we always leave open up the possibility of parole, even when we say it's a life sentence. In part because the desire is that maybe it's 40 years from now, but that person may someday be able to get out of jail, may have some hope of redemption, a societal redemption. So, and if we don't, if you look at the most jaded criminals in prison, they're the ones who believe nothing they could ever do would fix their situation. And there may be a number of different reasons for that. It may not even be a Christ thing. It may be just they feel like they're so poor, so disadvantaged, so all of these things that they take that attitude of there's no point in trying. But those are the people who never are able to improve their lives because they just have no hope for redemption. So that's why it is so critical that we start by offering them to the best of our ability the kind of redemption we can offer them. And that does come with some caveats, because we need to talk about the idea of temporal punishment, because one of the first objections people throw out when you say, oh, we should be offering forgiveness, is that the thought is, well, does that mean all murderers go free? Does that mean that we're not going to do anything to punish people? No, it doesn't mean that at all. We can't confuse forgiveness with penance. We can't confuse it with some other things too, but we can't confuse forgiveness with penance. The fact that you need to make up for what you've done wrong is not the same thing as being unwilling to offer them forgiveness. And in fact, penance is one of the greatest gifts you can give a person. It actually, unlike how it appears, is a way to offer redemption. Because penance says, at the end of the penance, you're free. Right? So an example that you will see is criminals who get out of jail and are trying to reform their lives. One of the things they'll even say when they feel like they are not being given a second chance is they'll say, I've done my time, right? I did what I had to do. I paid my penalty for my crime. And what they're basically saying is they're feeling cheated because they were told that after they served their sentence, they would be free, and they don't feel that way. They don't feel like now that they've completed their sentence, they were actually given what they were promised. So penance, punishment, is a means to redemption. It is saying, here is the vehicle you can use to undo some of the temporal damage that your sins, your crimes have done. Another example of this, right, is in a much more loving situation between a husband and a wife. The husband makes a big mistake. He does something he shouldn't do. The fact that coming home with flowers is likely to be a fruitful endeavor makes him much more interested in doing the penance. It makes him want to do that, and it's a sign that he desires forgiveness. And the fact that it will help in that process, it may not be enough, but makes him want to do that penance, and that penance is a gift to him. It helps him get that redemption that he desires. We also shouldn't forgive forgiveness with societal and personal safety. There are people who are not yet ready for redemption, and we need to offer them pathways to it. But if there are people who are not going to do well, we have to do things to protect ourselves, and often for their own good. If you have somebody who's in jail for murder, who's going to keep murdering people until they reform their lives, adding additional murder sentences to their crime just means they're going to be in jail longer. Preventing them from murdering again is a service to them. That way there's only one murder conviction on their record, not 2 or 3 or 10. If you think about it, we do these kinds of things to ourselves. One of the times I was really struggling with my weight, I put a lock on my own pantry. I didn't let myself get into the pantry. By the way, that was a horrible solution. It did not work at all, because there are plenty of other avenues to food besides the pantry, but that's beside the point. We recognize that sometimes even ourselves we need restrictions. We need controls to protect our own lack of control, lack of willingness to do the right things. And so sometimes, unfortunately, we have to impose that on others. Society does it in the case of the criminal justice system. We do it within our families of ways that we protect ourselves. If we have a family member who's behaving badly, parents with their children, etc. So it's not. It is not the same thing to think of forgiveness, which is the idea that this person can have redemption, and then these other ideas of penance and societal protection. But the key here is, what is our motivation when we are considering punishment, when we are considering protecting ourselves from them? What is our ultimate motivation? Is our ultimate motivation to be punitive to them in a we don't like them kind of way? or is it to offer them an avenue of penance? Are we locking them up to not commit any more crimes because for their own sake it will not be good for them to commit more crimes and it will not be good for society as well? Or are we doing it because we don't like them and we want them out of sight and we want them out of view? So it's funny, you can have the same conclusion, this person needs to be locked up for 25 years, and you can the reason you decided to do it can be very different. It can be good or it can be bad. There are times it is appropriate and right and needed, and it's what society should do. But again, why are we doing it? Are we doing it because they're evil, because we don't like them, or are we doing it because ultimately it is best for them, for society, for humanity to do this? Next, sins against us, right? These are the ones that torture people the most. There's nothing that hurts more than a sin between spouses, because it's a person that you trust so deeply and they've hurt you, and it is so hard to let it go. Brothers and sisters, parents and children, these kinds of things, it can be very, very hard. And we hold on to it because at some level we feel like the injustice is not taken care of if we don't hold on to our anger. Somehow they will be let off the hook, and it will not be good if they aren't made to pay. And we will hold on to that for very long periods of time. And it truly is about the hurt. It's not, again, about helping them have an opportunity for penance, helping them not do the wrong things. It's about we want to harm them because they harmed us. And eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. They harmed us. We want to harm them. It's natural. It's human. We all struggle with it in one form or another. The thing I always start with when I talk about this is ask yourself honestly. It's over. What they did to you is done. Moving forward, what are you gaining? What is the value of holding on to that sense of offense? What are you gaining through that anger that you hold on to? Because actually, when people start asking that question, they realize the person who is suffering the most because of the anger is themselves. Do they even know that we're still holding on to it? So many times a grudge, the other person's like, oh, they're still angry at me? I didn't even know. And so what purpose did it have to be angry with them when they didn't even know that they were? In that case, it's the most full sense of you are the only one suffering, we are the only ones suffering when we refuse to forgive. And then even when they do know, the impact's often larger on us. The one who's paying a larger price. We refuse to go to that party because, whatever, Aunt Millie's there. I don't have an Aunt Millie, so I can say that. Aunt Millie's there, and I can't stand Aunt Millie because she did whatever. Well, you're the one who didn't get to go to the party. And even if Aunt Millie is like, oh, she really hates me and she wouldn't come to the party, who's suffering more? We're suffering more. So you have to ask yourself, what's the point of this? What is the value of the supposed punishment that we're giving them? And that, while it doesn't answer every situation, some of them I think you do have to go back to the previous things I mentioned, but for so many of these deep personal ones that are about us, the key to unlocking it is to recognize we're only harming ourselves. And that's the other general truth of forgiveness. Who benefits from forgiving? The forgiver benefits from forgiving too. They get to let go of the anger, of the hatred, of all of those negative things. And they are freed from what had happened to them. And then here's my final bit on if you can't forgive. Because people say, I've heard you, I intellectually believe you that you are right, I agree, it's just not happening. right? I just can't do it for whatever reason. I'm struggling. We can go to forgiveness and confess that we are struggling to forgive. You can go into the confessional and you can say, my Aunt Millie hurt me 3 years ago. I know I should forgive her, and I can't do it. And my lack of ability to forgive her is a sin, and I am here to confess it. Like all confessions, it can be very freeing. It can be that first step. And sometimes, like our other sins, it may take more than one trip to the confessional to get over it. It may take 20 trips to the confessional to get beyond that sin. But it can get us on the road if thinking about it and all those things aren't helping. We can get to that place where we're at least starting to consider forgiveness. Okay, so hopefully I've made a great pitch for forgiveness. I've said what we have to do to emulate Christ is we have to forgive. And now we're thinking, okay, but if I forgive them and they don't ever change, if they're the negative things that have them sinning all the time never change, the ultimate reality is still not good for them, right? And that's where your heart really should be if you want to be in the right place, is that I want to forgive them. I want them to go to the right places, but I'm just worried that where are we going to go with this, even though I am forgiving them, if they never change? They will be suffering the temporal consequences of their sins anyway. And so the next stage after forgiveness is to evangelize, to convince them, right? What does Christ say to the lady to the woman the adulterer who's about to be stoned, and he convinces the elders to go away and not stone her, and he says, nor do I condemn you, but go and sin no more. Now, we're not Christ. We can't just lay that out there like that. But what we can do is be an evangelizing force in their life that hopefully helps lead them that direction. So that's what we should do next. But this is hard. We all know evangelizing is extremely hard. So we're going to talk a little bit about the key pieces to evangelization. And I've used these next few slides in a number of different presentations. If you've seen them before and you're like, oh gosh, he's going into the same thing, I promise we're only going to be here for a little while. But I do think they're worth repeating, so I'll use them anyway. The first thing we have to do if we want to be strong evangelizers is we have to get rid of our ego. This cannot be about gaining trophies. This cannot be about some sense of moral righteousness on our own part. It has to be truly about desiring what is good for them. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why do we want them to avoid sin? And really, 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 not just on a lighthearted level, but in a serious, meaningful way, ask yourself this question. What's my motivation? Why do I desire this? Right? A classic example, and one I've seen in myself, is your children, are maybe adults now. They're not children anymore, so the way you can parent them has changed a lot, and they're maybe doing something that you're not that happy with, and you want them to change. I'm a deacon in the church. It's not a great look when my children aren't following the faith good. So do I want them to reform their lives because I want what's best for them, or because I don't want to be embarrassed? Right? And being a deacon is not the only person who feels this way. Plenty of parents feel like, oh, there's such an embarrassment to me. I go to church and I have to admit that my children are shacking up or whatever they're doing that I'm not happy with, right? And so your desire to have them do the right thing is not coming from a place of desiring what's best for them. It's coming from a place of ego, of, oh, this is making me look bad. So we have to be very careful about what our motivation is. Is this truly about desiring what is best for them? And until we get to that place, we're not going to be good evangelizers. Our motivations are going to be all messed up. We're going to come at it completely wrong. And so we need to ask ourselves this question honestly, look ourselves in the mirror in the worst possible way, and really understand why we want to help them, and work on transforming ourselves until that answer is, the reason I want to help them is because turning away from sin is what is best for them. Full stop, end of story, nothing else, that's it. And hopefully if you've gone in this pathway of this is somebody you needed to forgive, that might be a little easier. But in other places in life, it won't be. And then the next, and I think these go hand in hand. I don't think these are uncoupled at all. Because to really get to that right place of ridding yourself of ego, we need to pray. And part of what we need to pray for is for them. The famous quote, St. Monica, St. Augustine's mother, was complaining to her bishop about how St. Augustine was never turning the right way yet because he wasn't yet St. Augustine. And the bishop's response was, speak less to Augustine about God and more to God about Augustine. Pray. The power of prayer is huge. It transforms our own heart. The fruits of that go to the angels and to God himself. Prayer is good for us. It's good for our soul. It helps with our ego. It helps with forgiveness. Prayer, prayer, prayer. We can never have too much of it. And then the final piece of being good at evangelizing, and then after the intermission, we're going to be more tactical, but is patience. The number one thing that derails people who got all the way to the right place is impatience. This has to be solved now. This is the meeting, where I'm going to get it solved. You will see as we go through the things in the second half of this talk, so many of the times we make mistakes, it's because we are exhibiting a false sense of urgency, where we've said, but this is my only chance. This is the only time I could do it. I'm worried about what would happen to that. Like, you can even be in the right framework of you really want what's right for them, but you're still going to make tactical mistakes because of impatience. People come to God on their time, not our time. And we're actually really on God's time, but it's definitely not our time. And so we have to be willing to say, this may not happen tomorrow. It may not happen next week. It may not happen next year. But, so my big ministry is helping out with people who become Catholic. A fair percentage of that, actually, it's a minority percentage. It's a smaller minority even, but a significant number of people who are coming are spouses who's been married for 20, 30, 40 years, and their spouse inevitably comes up to me and said, I'd given up hope. It was never going to happen. I didn't think there was a chance. I tried for 30 years, and nothing happened. And then all of a sudden I stopped trying and they came to the church. That's a very common story that you hear. And I never say this. In fact, I'm almost afraid to say it because so many people have talked to. I'm sure we're going to see this eventually. But actually it might have been that your nagging was part of the problem, that you were coming from this place of ego and not openness and whatever. And it was smothering what little interest they had. And yet, 30 years later, it was apparently their right time. So being patient, watch out for the idea of getting frustrated, watch out for the idea of pride emerging, and this is huge. One of the best ways to help somebody with anything they need to change is to model it for them, right? If you want to teach somebody how to be charitable, you be charitable, and they will see you being charitable, and they will emulate you being charitable because they say, that looks good. So if you want to teach people how to accept forgiveness, be forgiving. You model forgiveness for them. And when you model forgiveness for them, they are more likely to accept the ideas and principles of forgiveness, both in receiving it from you and doing it for others. So if you mess up, if you let impatience get to you, that's okay at a certain level. Just apologize. Just say, I'm sorry. I really want these things. Deacon Ken told me not to do this, and I did it anyway, and I'm truly sorry. You are absolutely right. I'm putting way too much pressure on you. I don't even want to qualify that and talk about my motivations. I just want to say, you're right. I'm sorry. Please accept my forgiveness. I will try to do better in the future. Okay, so with that, we're into the intermission right on time. If you are on the live stream and you're thinking I have something I want to ask a question about, now is a great time to do it because, as I said, you're a minute or two behind. And so by the time you type in the question and it shows up on our system, it's going to be 2-3 minutes from now, from our perspective. So that way, when we come back in 5, they'll be all queued up for a Q&A session that we'll have immediately after the break. So go ahead and do that. Make sure you're logged in on YouTube. Type the comment in the chat session. And if you absolutely can't do that, go to deaconken.org/blog/chat. Enter your question there, and we will see everybody in 5 minutes. Okay, we're back. Online questions, do we have any? We do. All right, good to hear.
One has to be brave to approach another person. So many people claim to be Christians, but do not practice their faith, do not pray.
Was that a question? So agreed at some level, absolutely, and we will talk a bit about how to decide when to address others, and it is tough to be brave. So this is hard because there are certain people who struggle really with being brave, and it really is just about being shy. I will say sometimes our reluctance is the wise part of us recognizing that we are not in a good place to address this person. So we do have to be a little bit aware of where that nervousness is coming from. And it may be we're just a nervous person we struggle with, that we're not in a good place to be brave as we should be. But it could also be that's God telling you that this is not the right moment for this. So we have to be careful. Other questions online? No. Anything people here want to ask? All right, we'll keep rolling. Okay, so, and I probably did these slides backwards, but oh well. So we're going to put on hold for a minute who we might talk to and when we feel appropriate to talk to people. And we're going to assume now that we have found somebody who is at least willing to engage with us in some way, and what we need to be talking to them about that will help move them the right direction. And what you're going to see in this list is it's often not a direct approach. A direct approach can be too confrontational. It can be they're not ready for that. But when we talk about underlying principles, it's not nearly as threatening, and therefore they're much more likely to consider it. So you go up to somebody and you say, "You're doing this. This is bad." Well, now when we hear that, our reaction should be, "Oh my gosh, I need to entertain what this person is saying. They felt brave enough to tell me. I need to be thinking it through." That's what a good receptive person should be doing. And by the way, it doesn't mean they're right, but we should be listening and entertaining it, particularly if it's coming from a credible voice. But we would be extremely unusual in having that reaction. Most people just get offended and tell you to take a long walk off a short pier, as they say. But if you talk about underlying ideas, if you see somebody who is struggling with, like let's say some form of sexual immorality, talking about underlying principles of love and what real love is, and how, you probably don't want to use this word, but to just say it bluntly, fornication is very different than loving relationships. That has the possibility of seeding the ideas that we need to talk about without, smacking them in the face with, "You're doing this thing that's wrong." So I've come up with some issues that are, I think, very structural in nature, but I think actually probably need to be entertained more often. And again, you're not attacking them directly. First is, why is sin bad in the first place? What is it that we are trying to avoid? Because we've come to a place in secularism where actually this is not obvious to most people. One of I think the real negatives of American culture is we take a very reductionist view of being individualists. We very much believe every person is an individual, and every person has rights, and every person is has had, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We all deserve that, to use our secular language. And it's not inherently wrong, but it's very reductionist. And so you say things like, the society says things like, hey, why can't I have 50 sexual partners? I like it. That is me pursuing happiness. Who am I harming? These types of things. And so misunderstanding what we should be, how we should be thinking about our actions, and having a very reductionist view of, if I can't come up with a specific, clear, direct harm, then it must be okay, I think is a very important place to start. And so what we have to start with, and this language can be challenging to use, but using the language of what makes the world a worse place. Now, the Catholic language for that is, this is God's creation, and we were created to participate in it lovingly and make it better. But you don't have to use those words. You can just say, are your actions making the world a better place? Is the result of what you're doing not just selfish and personal, but selfless and helpful to the world? And by the way, it is in giving that we receive. We get all of these personal benefits from making the world a better place. So it's not that it's where it's meritless for ourselves, but we just have to change the way we approach these things. Not in terms of what's good for me, but am I making the world a better place? I had a conversation with a coworker of mine. I don't think he was hugely offended. It's definitely the wrong word, but he was surprised, is what he was. But I think just thrown off. And I said, one of the things that's really important to me for my career path is that I feel the work that I'm doing is adding to making the world a better place in at least a little way. Now sometimes that's very, at least from a religious perspective, not very clear. My first job was working on making networking cards for printers back when printers didn't do networking. And so you say to yourself, how's that making the world a better place? Well, my life's better when I can print easily, and I'm adding, okay, is it some great, wonderful thing? Am I going to get the Nobel Peace Prize for people being able to print more easily? No, I'm not. But the world is moving in a positive direction because of what I'm doing. Making a good movie, even a secular movie, that's something people enjoy. It makes the world a better place. Fixing the road makes the world a better place. But there are other jobs that really their job is to extract. And not to be too harsh, because I think you can be in the world of finance and helping people save for retirement, and so that they can retire and all that. That's good. But people who are just like, I'm figuring out how to manipulate the stock market so I can get money out of it, where I'm not thinking in terms of, hey, I'm investing in companies, those companies are making the world a better place, and I get a return on my investment because of that. Two very different attitudes. And I very much, in how I look at the world, look in terms, try to anyway, of, is this a net positive for the world, or am I just extracting things from it for my own interests? And there's a lot of work these days that I think is moving more and more in the direction of, no, I just want to extract. I just want to figure out how I can get the money out. And in fact, if you listen to a lot of economists who are on that end of the spectrum, what they will say, and I'm way on a tangent here, but they will say, well, anytime people are giving you money, you're making the world a better place. Because that's why they're giving you the money. They're giving you the money because you're providing something of value to them. No, I call BS on that. Absolutely not. While there's some truth in that way of thinking, it is not a clear ideal. And so therefore, our goal should be to make the world a better place, and we should be thinking about that in everything from our career paths, bread on the table is important. Sometimes that's what you got to do, but where we desire for our career, where we desire for our families, what we desire for everything, is our mindset. Are we contributing or taking away? It's a great way to get people to start thinking more about their actions. Oh, gee, is this really making the world a better place? That person who was in finance just to figure out how to suck money out of the economy, if you can talk them into the idea that, well, you should be figuring out how to do finance in a way so that people's lives are better, says, you know what, I'm going to get into retirement planning instead, and I'm going to help people learn. And they're going to still pay me, and I'm still going to make money. And by the way, since I know the market really well, I'll still have opportunities for good financial gain, but I'll be making the world a better place. And you'll help them start a journey where they're wanting to think in those terms. And they, without knowing it, they're thinking about what is sinful and what is not. And let's go further down this road of not hurting anybody. It is a hugely reductionist attitude. Our actions have complicated consequences that are weird to think about when you start thinking about where these things go. You know, just the influence you have on people. And I really think we should be thinking more about these things. I mean, I'll give you a really dumb one, and I do not have a clear answer on this one way or another, but I've always been a little uncomfortable with giving to the church online. And I don't want to discourage anybody from doing that. I'm just walking through a logic that I go through in my heart. Because every time the basket, now I don't personally have this problem anymore because the basket doesn't go by me. So I give online because it's my only option to some degree. It would be really hard for me to put money in the basket. But back when I sat in the pew and maybe I was still studying to be a deacon, how does that look? Oh, bucket. Deacon Ken never puts money in the bucket, right? That's not a great look. I could still be giving tons of money at home, but I'm not looking great in that moment. So, I mean, and if that's true, that there might be 20 people at church who are less likely to give because they never see the guy who's training to be a deacon put money in the basket. Think about all the actions of our lives that have ripple effects. So to say this, to have this hugely reductionist, who am I hurting attitude, is really, really negative. And so if we can find ways to talk people out of thinking that way, that consent as the only thing that matters when we're talking about relationships, that it's not some clear sense of harm is all that matters. We'll be, again, moving them in that direction where they're thinking deeper about their own actions and what they might want to do. So focusing on this idea of that's just not a good way to think can help them. I talked about this in the first half, but it's worth coming back to. Really helping them to believe the ideas of forgiveness. And even if it's not about them personally in this moment, because now we're trying to focus on evangelizing, hopefully that need for forgiveness that existed, but I really think people who feel like they've been redeemed, or at least there's a redemption available to them, and that people around them are willing to offer it to them, are much more likely to change their lives. That cynicalness of it's not going to matter is so destructive. And so coaching people on how much we as Catholics believe in the idea of forgiveness and redemption, that Christ came into the world with the primary mission of, through his death and resurrection, freeing us from sin. Talking about these things can be hugely transformative because so much of what may be hardening their heart is because they don't actually believe it's real. And to hear somebody talking about the idea that redemption is real and that there are people in this world who really believe it, who honestly think that murderers can be forgiven and some of them will be in heaven. Even if they're not a murderer, hearing someone speak in such revolutionary terms about forgiveness can do wonderful things. And so I just think the more we talk about forgiveness, the more we open people's hearts to changing their lives. And then maybe as a counter to that, well, I don't know if it's a counter, but something that maybe offsets it a little bit. One of the things I think people sometimes struggle with when they are confronted with these, I gave a pretty high standard there with, hey, how do my actions affect the world? I mean, for some people that can be crippling, right? They get to this point of where I'm not sure if that's going to be okay, and we're all constantly worried about things. And then the fear that goes along with that is that they back away from a redemptive mindset, right? They'll say, oh, no, because if I don't do all these right things, I won't be doing the right things, and that's sinning. And then they kind of forget that forgiveness is available to us because they got too focused on trying to be good. And so, and getting to this place where we can say, hey, we admit it, we've got lofty goals, and we admit it, we fall short. And we admit it that that's why Christ had to come to redeem us, is because we do fall short. So to create this kind of, to use a different religion's framework, a yin and a yang, right? That we put ourselves to this very high standard, and we backstop that with this very high level of forgiveness. And that allows us a power to try really hard, but then also have a means to survive it when we don't quite live up to these very lofty standards. We put those two pieces together to create something whole that's workable and usable, and show them this vision of you can't, because I think a lot of particularly secularly minded people, why they do not have high moral standards for themselves is they are afraid of what happens if they fail at the moral standards they set for themselves. They don't want, so what do you do instead? You have low standards. You have low standards because I don't want to deal with the consequences of what happens if I fail. So particularly if you don't believe in forgiveness or you don't have a lot of trust in forgiveness, you're not going to set very high standards for yourself, because God help you if you, quite literally, God help you if you don't meet your standards. So set them really low. And so you end up this really negative cycle of, and because that's also in a certain way saying, oh gosh, if somebody doesn't meet the very, very low standards I set, well then they truly deserve condemnation, right? It's this spiral of negativity of if you're below the line, it's really, really horrible, so we better set the line very, very low, which means it's so low that if you fall even below that line, you're really condemned, and you just keep going down and down and down. Where the other way, and that's basically what our society's been doing ever since modernism, but the other way is, no, we have very, very lofty goals, and yes, they're tough to meet, and that's why we have redemption to help us so that we can continue to have these lofty goals, and we can keep building up and up and up, elevating ourselves to better behavior, because we're not afraid that if we fall short, there won't be any options for forgiveness. And so we can continue to set high standards because we can continue to trust and hope in forgiveness. So putting those ideas together, yeah, we have lofty goals, but this is why also forgiveness is so central to our faith, because we recognize they're hard, and they're high. Okay, so with that, now I'm a little late. Now I'm going to finish up with talking about different people in our lives, because as I talked about, it was kind of when I went into the stuff about patience, we make a huge mistake when we overstep our relational bounds when we try to help people. We try to treat everybody like there's someone who we have the right, that it is reasonable for us to talk to them in certain ways. And it's just, it ends up with lots of negative consequences. So I'm going to talk about 4 levels of people. Strangers, people we don't know at all, we've met them on the street, we're just, having some, whatever. We got onto the same bus kind of person. Next, acquaintances, people we know but don't know that well. We couldn't say much about their life. Then loose friends, maybe close co-workers or distant relatives or friends that you're not that close with. And then your inner circle, the people who you trust with your secrets and your deep things. So it's kind of 4 levels of how you know. We're going to walk through them one by one, how we can help them and what we shouldn't be doing as well. So, starting with strangers, and we'll work up from there. Strangers, don't pretend you're their friend or relative. Because you're not. You're not in a place to talk to them, you know. You find out somebody's doing something really negative with their, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. Well, who are you to say that to them right then? Just don't. Don't let, and I think what for most people gets them to do this is a false sense of urgency. Because the rebuttal would be, well, when am I ever going to get the chance to talk to this person? I just met them on the bus. I'm never going to see them again. They need Christ's redemption just as much as anybody else. This is my only moment. What do you want from me? Right? I have to accost them. I don't have any choice. And it creates this really negative interaction cycle that's very, very bad. It just leads bad places. I had a story, but I'm feeling a little bit behind, so I'm not going to say it. What you can do is remember that your actions, and you're going to see this at I think there's 2 bullets that are on every slide, and this is one of them. Remember, your actions mean more than your words. It doesn't matter if it's a stranger or your wife, your actions matter more than your words. So, you're dealing with a stranger, you have an opportunity to model for them love, forgiveness, charity, high moral standards. You don't have to accost them. You can just demonstrate it. They may not notice, but they also might notice. And every time they see a person who acts in good ways and does the right things, the more they're going to believe that those kind of people exist in the world. And you'll be that little piece of the puzzle. Be charitable and forgiving. Somebody makes a mistake, you may even have the right to be angry with them. And it could be even if somebody else more close to your life, you have the right to tell them, that wasn't good of you, I'm not pleased, you should ask for forgiveness. Not with the stranger. Be charitable, be forgiving, you're only going to have a few moments with them, share with them love, not condemnation. Now, that is not to say you shouldn't be open to engaging them. Every once in a while, you hear this wonderful story of somebody who met on the bus and their stroller almost fell over, and this stranger helped them and saved their baby, and they ended up becoming lifelong friends. And, those things happen. So it's not that you shouldn't be open to engaging with them, but just don't force it. Let it be natural. And then even if you're going to do that, if you're going to be open to engaging them, be aware of what might be perceived as overstepping your bounds. Make sure you're aware of that. And then finally, second to finally, always when you're talking to people, you have no idea what their vocabulary is, use a secular one. Don't use religious language. It's probably not going to land with them. Use a secular language. Avoid using God in a way that's just going to make them think you're some crazy religious nut. Just speak to them in very, very secular language that you would imagine them talking to others. Because as I showed in those other slides, there are principles you can share, and you can share them in ways without talking about God. So do that. And then here's the key that hopefully disarms you from this feeling of I have to do something. You're not alone. There are other people that are their acquaintance or their friend or their family member that may be in a much better place to help them. So trust that those people are out there in their lives, that God will put the people in their lives who can actually help them. And don't make the situation worse by being an example of a bad religious person to them, because that's only going to undermine that other person's ability to be successful in their work. So remember, you're not alone. Okay, on to acquaintances. So this is, again, somebody that you know, but calling them friends might be a bit of a stretch. Again, don't pretend you're their friend or their relative. That is always going to be perceived as threatening or overstepping the bounds. Don't approach them. If there is going to be an opportunity with an acquaintance, it's going to be when they come to you. And you might be surprised how frequently it happens. Again, because the first bullet, the next one's going to be, remember, actions mean more than words. If you're an acquaintance, a coworker who's at the other end of the hallway, and they constantly look at you and go, there is something about that guy or that lady. They've got something special. I want to get to know them. And so they bump into you in the lunchroom, and you're that nice person who says, oh, you can go before me. Go ahead and use the microwave. Well, you were here first. I don't care. Go first. They're going to eventually approach you about something probably small, and that becomes the window. Whereas if you go to them, it's going to put them in a position of backing off. It's maybe not the right moment, all of that. So let them come to you. Model good behavior and wait for that opportunity and let them come to you. But even still, remember that there are things you can do that will be perceived as, I didn't want that much help, right? That's enough. So again, actions mean more than words. Be willing to be very open about your faith, but check yourself on your ego. The idea that you're wonderful is not going to sit well with them if that's the story you tell of yourself. Welcome future questions by answering inquiries charitably. Be open, be honest, but do it in a way that gives them a lot of hope that talking to you again will be a good, productive thing. And then kind of along this line is give them an out. Because you're not going to be aware of when you're crossing these thresholds where they're starting to get uncomfortable. So constantly be giving them a pathway to leaving, right? To disengaging, to getting away from you, to ending the conversation. Because there are very subtle ways they can feel obligated or compelled, and you won't recognize it. So by always keeping it in a frame of mind where it's easy for them to disengage, one, that single interaction will less likely go poorly, and when they're thinking about approaching you again, they're not going to be like, oh my gosh, they trapped me in the corner last time for 10 minutes and it was a disaster. No, they'll be like, well, that ended well, so let me try it again. And if they keep getting the sense of this person's not going to corner me, this person's not going to compel me, they might be willing to up that interest in what you're asking. All right, so now we're talking about casual friends, distant family. Don't pretend you're better than them. That never goes over well. Saying, I've got everything figured out. I find in my homilies, if I talk about the way I fail, people love it. If I talk about the things I see in others I don't like, nobody wants to talk to me after Mass. So, being a humble person who talks about your own failings and the ways you're weak, and to sympathize with others' struggles is the way to go. Never have an attitude of I'm better than you. Also, don't make everything about the faith. And this is more about, in a certain way, you're allowed to make everything about the faith, but you have to be careful about how you phrase things. It's a beautiful morning. That's talking about God. God made the morning. It's a great day. But it sounds very different than, oh, I'm just so blessed this morning, right? It gives that impression of I'm better than you because I'm blessed this morning. There's all these kind of negative connotations. So be careful about constantly using the language of I'm trying to engage you into this deep Catholic faith discussion. They're going to go, oh my gosh, that guy's intolerable, right? Whereas if you're just saying, what a wonderful morning, I'm so thankful, how you doing this morning? The things that are sharing the love of God, you're just not framing it in a way that's making them think, this guy's constantly talking about these things. Also, don't hope to help them, but it's going to start through your actions, not through your words. Because you're going to have those repetitive opportunities. They're going to see your actions over and over because they are a distant family member or a friend or something like that. So if there's one that it's true for all of them, but where it's most important, this is it. Do offer them support and help of the most charitable kind. That's the pathway to a closer friendship. And frankly, if you're really going to help someone, it's when they become close, right? So be open. Do be willing to let things play out over time. Again, you're not in a rush. Your goal is to help them over the next decade, not over the next 10 minutes. And then share your struggles, your weaknesses, what you have difficulty with. Never get offended if they say something negative about the church. say, if you're going to defend the church, do it after. I totally know what you mean. I've and a lot of these things, they get out there, and it sounds really bad. But I'll tell you some other things that I've thought of. But start with affirming, not with rebutting. Okay, and on to the last group. Close family or really close friends. Biggest mistake in today's world. Perhaps there was an era where this had some weight to it, but we're all way too independent and way too easy to make life on our own. There's no penalty behind cutting people off. It's just not the right way to go anymore. I guess somebody's allowed to disagree with me on this. I mean, you're allowed to disagree with me on lots of this, but I could see where there are other people say, no, sometimes you do have to set up a line that people cross, that you say this. But I would say I can't imagine what that situation is. Leaving the door open is so important. Don't cut them off. Don't make your love of them conditional on listening to you, engaging with you in the way you want. By the way, that is a pure sign that you're not about actual forgiveness and actual love. Real love is not conditional. Real love is love. It is unconditional. And so when things are conditional, you're demonstrating that it's not as loving as you want to think it is. And don't give up hope, because it can be very hard. There can be these very long-term things that are not going well. Again, your actions mean more than your words. This is a little bit different because part of your actions with your close friends is how you talk to them, and you have more opportunities to talk in depth. This is a group you can choose to say, I have something that's really concerning to me. I would like to talk to you about it. But again, how did I phrase that? I phrased it in, you have the right to say no to me, but I'm asking as your family member, your close friend, for you to hear me out. It's being charitable, it's being open, it's being loving, it's not conditional. And if you are someone who through your actions has proven to be a person of integrity, a person of honesty, they're much more likely to say, oh, gee, what is it? Yes, please, tell me. Focus on common ground. If you notice, all of the things I started with there were these vague generalities were about building up common ground to then go further with. So if you could have somebody that you're just like, boy, we are not on the same page. Probably that could be true, but find common ground if you can, right? And actually, there almost always is. It just may be that ground is a lot smaller and further away than you hope. But find it, whether or not it's easy or large. And then this is a biggie that I think matters more. Theoretically, it applies to all levels, but it's one where, again, you're much more likely to have a use for it, is when you make a mistake in this department, admit it. Say, yeah, I put way too much pressure on you. I'm sorry. I just really care, but that was not appropriate. And it doesn't matter that my motivations were good. I did something wrong, and I'm sorry. I ask for your forgiveness. And by the way, then you back off for a little bit. Kind of how you prove you're actually sorry is you take a little bit of a step back. So we have to remember, we are dealing with different people. We have to treat each person differently. We have to treat that person as a person. And part of recognizing that is recognizing you don't have the same relationship with each person. And that makes it so we have to really be willing to treat them as a person, not a type of person. They're not a Protestant. They're not an atheist. They're Bob and Mary and Frank. And sometimes that can be really hard, right? We tend to want to just put people in their category. They're the wrong political party. They're whatever. And I want to talk to them about why they're wrong, but not because I know them as Bob or Dave or Mary or Maria, but again, you can see how that ego comes in there. How there's all in that, I want to talk to them because they're wrong, and I want to set them straight. We have to treat everybody as individuals. All right, conclusion reminders. Online, if you're going to ask a question, now is the time, because once we get through the slides, we'll have one more opportunity for Q&A, and there probably won't be an opportunity for repeat questions. So get them in now. Same thing, logged in on YouTube. If you can't, go to deaconken.org/blog/chat, and then we'll have opportunities for questions both here in the room and online. All right, so conclusion. What do we do when people fail? What do we do when people sin? We come from a framework of forgiveness. We are a people of forgiveness. God told us when asked, do I have to forgive 7 times? No, you have to forgive 70 times 7 times. We must be tactically wise. This is not easy. This is challenging work, and we cannot just bulldoze our way through these things. We have to recognize that there are right ways to approach this and there are wrong ways to approach this, because calling people away from sin is not easy. And so we have to get ego out of it. We have to get urgency out of it. Our goal must be, what can we do to help this person? And sometimes that answer is almost nothing. And so the best we can do is model being a good Christian and hope that makes the teeniest little dent, and that the next person who does the same thing will add to that teeny little dent, and 450 dents later, an acquaintance or a friend will be much better positioned to help them. And so get rid of the ego, get rid of the false righteousness, get rid of the urgency. But that's not because we don't want to call them away from sin. It's because we may not be in the right place right now. Okay. So next time, and for those of you who are very astute, you will know that what I said was going to be next time, last time, is not what I did tonight. I made a huge tactical mistake, so I'm willing to admit I make those too. I had planned to do a panel discussion this evening talking about grief, about people who've lost loved ones and how they've managed that grief and the things that worked and didn't work. And it's a great idea, but doing it when I've got a huge vacation in the middle of that month where I need to organize that panel and get all those people together, and leading up to Holy Week was very foolhardy. It was just not going to happen. So I think I'm going to have to push that till next year. It is still something I very much want to do, but it wasn't going to get pulled off, so I significantly scaled back to a talk I could do with just preparing at night. So I will do my best to make this next one happen. I always try to make the last one of the year a fairly lighthearted one, not so on the nose hard topic. And so we're just going to talk about some of my favorite moments from TV and film. I'm going to show some video clips, see if we can't make it work well, hopefully it'll be inspiring. There'll be some things that you either know or haven't seen before. Maybe a movie you'll want to see after it's doing that. And then afterwards you'll be like, well, that one scene was good, but Deacon Ken's wrong about the whole movie. Whatever. So it'll be lighthearted and fun, but we're going to talk about, I'll probably have 10 to 15 clips of little things that I think are just awesome. After that, we got our summer break. I usually take off June, July, and August, come back in September. Always feel free to reach out to me if you think there's something I should be talking about, some talk I've done in the past. It's like it's been too long since you've done that. I'm always interested to hear what people are interested in having me talk about. So please reach out. Speaking of which, here's how you get a hold of me. You either go to my webpage at deaconken.org, or you email me at ken@deaconken.org, or you found my YouTube channel and you hang out with me there. And if you're online, obviously you can pause this to look at more detailed options there. Okay, final couple slides here. Spiritual direction. I offer monthly direction to those who are interested. I am a trained Ignatian spiritual director. I took a multi-year training program. It's not free. Most people don't know this, but deacons don't collect a salary. We are an entirely volunteer position. And this is asking for a lot of my time, and it's just something I feel it's appropriate that just like you pay your counselor or your mechanic or whatever, that to get individual time with me on a regular basis. If somebody has a concern, they want to talk to me privately for a meeting or two, don't feel like I charge just to meet with you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody who meets with me every month, all the time. And $500 for the year, you're talking about $40 a session. It's not that much. So, and I promise I do a lot to make it worth your while. So if you're interested, go to deaconken.org/spiritual-direction. I probably can take on 1 to 2 more people right now, but that's about it. Finally, subscribing on YouTube, and I didn't update the number. Oh boy, that's an old number. I think I'm at 317 subscribers right now, so that means I've got 683 to go. So we're making progress. Like whenever slide I grabbed this one from, I had over 800 to go. So we're making slow progress. So please subscribe, because when I get to 1,000, it unlocks a bunch of features. They recommend the video to a lot more people. And by the way, if you have 6 different Gmail accounts, you can subscribe to me 6 different times. So it always adds up. All right, and with that, on to final questions, and we will start online. No questions online. All right, that means we'll open it up to the room. Now you've heard the whole content, so you know what I did and didn't talk about, so you can go whichever direction you feel like. She's waiting. She's got the microphone. Okay, yes. Just make sure you hold it close to your mouth.
Thank you. So how would you deal with this situation when it's a bully, for example, somebody that will constantly go to you over and over and over?
And so, like, what kind of bullying are we thinking of? Like, give me an example.
I don't know, like a family member or like distant family member that will, constantly, I don't know, maybe it's just you that feel like that, like maybe make you feel bad about situations, comment on your things or situations.
So kind of a judgmental bully, right?
Kind of.
Like they're always picking on your life. Why are you wasting your time at church? Like maybe one avenue, but it actually is not limited to that. They're also willing to tell you why your sweater's stupid or whatever else they feel like saying, right?
Yeah. Like could be dumb things or like more serious.
Yeah. So it's an excellent example of where life gets challenging real quick, right? Because part of how you model good behavior is by, at a certain level, being willing to stand up for yourself when people are doing inappropriate things. But, so I'm going to give you a bit of a different example, but then I'll apply it to what you're saying. So I'm a pretty demanding father. I ask a lot. You can ask them, they'll tell you. And I recognize that. But I try to compensate for that by also including a lot of joy, a lot of love, a lot of forgiveness, right? So when you have somebody who requires a strong rebuttal at times because of the way they're treating you, you can, and you're thinking, boy, but they're just going to think, now I'm a jerk, right? Because I'm being fairly harsh to them. It's kind of this, like it's almost like you're treating them like a child. There's punishment for them, and when they're not treating you right, but don't let it poison you to where you're never kind to them. Be willing to, when they come up to you at Easter and say something that you don't like, or that's not the right way to say it, but that they do something inappropriate and you defend yourself, but also be willing the next week to reach out to them in a loving and caring way, right? When it's their birthday, get them a nice gift, Show them that it was about that action, not about you not liking them. And that can get really hard because it's requiring from you a lot of repeated forgiveness, and they're probably not going to get it the first 75 times out, right? That's what you're doing. They may not even see it. But again, you're modeling for them good forgiveness. in that you're both saying that this isn't right, don't do this to me, and also saying, but I am not writing you off. I'm not being unwilling to be kind and generous and loving to you. And because they're a family member, you get those repeated opportunities. So there's actually a win there that when somebody accosts you on the street, kind of, the inverse of what I'm afraid of us doing, you may never get another opportunity to show them the other half of yourself. Even though you're doing the right thing, it feels a little hard to because there's never that back door to come back. But with your family members, you are going to have those opportunities. So it's almost like go out of your way when that person is doing better things to latch on to those, and then to be proactive in finding moments where they're not being a bully, to be generous, be kind, be loving, to reach out, those kinds of things. And by the way, sometimes that'll open up little windows where they're like just confused with you. They're like, boy, at Easter, she yelled at me, and then next week, she was really nice, and that might lead them to the point of going, kind of what's your deal? I don't get you. You're mean one day and you're nice the other. If that question is asked honestly, and sometimes it's not, sometimes they're just being a bully again, but if it's asked honestly, it's a wonderful opportunity, because you can say, yeah, because these things that you do, I don't think they're right. But the reality is, I love you. And even when you don't do right things, I forgive you, and I love you, and I care about you. And so I'm not going to let those moments that I'm not happy about poison my love for you. And what a great testimony that is. That will definitely pull them back. Right? So you get special opportunities, and it's harder because, you're dealing with them more often, and it's repeated, and then you'll feel like you'll have made great progress with them because you'll have had that conversation, and it's like, wow, that was wonderful. And then the next cousin's birthday, they do something mean again, and you're like, well, what the heck? It didn't even work. But again, patience, keeping ego out of it, constantly being willing to forgive, gives you those opportunities to keep working on it. And 10 years from now, you may have been that person that makes them see, why I'm like this is because I don't have faith in my life. I don't do these things. And I'm seeing in my family members who love God, who go to church, who care about these things, they are so much better than me. Not because they told me, I just see it in their behavior, and you'll transform their lives. But I'm not saying this is easy. Like I say this like, ta-da! No, it's not. It's very hard. And this is where prayer and being willing to go into the confessional and saying, I cannot forgive them. They keep doing this to me, and it's so hard to forgive. It can help you keep your heart in the right place, even though it's a real challenge. You're welcome.
Let's kind of follow up with that in the sense of, do you keep on forgiving and forgiving? Because I have a similar situation with a couple of family members, and it's at the point where, where do I cut them off?
Yeah. And again, all these things are nuanced, careful, challenging. I know you don't necessarily mean in the hard sense of the word cut off, so I'm not going to take your words as having meant it that way. But there are times where maybe the phrase I would use is take a step back. That's a healthier phrase for how you would say, this person has a negative influence on me, and I need to take a little bit of a step back for my own purposes. But at the highest level, we should never give up on anybody. Let me give you a scenario where when somebody would come to me and I would be very understanding of them taking a step back, okay? My brother, he's always complaining. And you know what? We really like each other, but, and so he has this weird influence on me. And I find when I'm always, this is, by the way, this is hypothetical. This is not my brother. I'm being hypothetical. And I'm finding that when I spend a bunch of time with him, I'm becoming more negative because he's influencing me. In fact, actually, one of my recent talks, I talked about the idea that we think we're influencing them, and the reality is they're influencing us. And we have to be very aware of that possibility. So someone says to me, I really want to help my brother, I want to love my brother, but I find that when I'm really close to him, I'm a very negative, nasty person because he wears off on me, and I currently do not have the strength, the willpower, the fortitude to not let it happen to me. And so I'm taking a step back because I know I am not a good person when I overengage. I'd be like, yeah, thumbs up, exactly. Because actually, you're doing what you need to do to be a better Christian, to perhaps be more loving to somebody else in your life who there might bear more fruit in the near future, all of those kinds of things. So there are reasons to say, I need to extract myself from this. But again, why? Why am I doing it? Because the influence on me is negative, because it's causing other negative things that are not about them per se, and trying to influence them, but the influence that my interacting is having on myself, on my family, etc., etc., etc. Right? So, we have to be aware of the consequences of our interactions and be willing to say these interactions, although in the highest ideal, I should be willing to put myself through that torture, but I can say in practice and pragmaticness that it's not good. Like to give a really crass example, imagine a guy who had an affair with a woman and he recognizes he did all the wrong things, and now he wants to help that woman not be so promiscuous, right? That's not going to go well. That's a temptation waiting to be trouble again, right? You just have to accept that's not the person you can be helpful to. Because it's pushing you in all the wrong directions. And so maybe there's some weird corner case where you have some sphere of influence on them, but for the most part you have to say, no, you were a temptation for me, you pushed me, and not in a blame kind of way, but just acknowledging reality kind of way. I have to be far from you. And not because I dislike you, not because I think you're inherently a bad person, not because I don't think you can be forgiven. I just know for me to be the person I need to be, I can't engage with you. Or I can't engage with you in a certain way. Or I need to keep it to a certain level. Or. And so recognizing that, yeah, that exists and that, but at a theoretical level, there is no limit of what we should be trying to do to help others, as long as the implications on us and others around us are not taking the brunt of that, right? That's why Christ says, if your cheek can't take it anymore, and it's not because you're not willing to, it's just it's not going to go somewhere good even for yourself. Other thoughts or questions before we wrap up?
How to deal with family members who are anti-Catholic, who really hate your faith and cut you off because you oppose certain societal.
Right. So, and this may not be your particular, but the example of the Catholic Church hates gay people and Uncle Bob's gay, and so I'm cutting you off because I care about Uncle Bob. There's all kinds of various machinations they'll go through. What your church stands for is so unacceptable to me, I cut you off. At a certain level, if that's their choice, you can't, there's not much, well, I should be careful here. You're extremely limited in what you can do to overcome that, maybe is the right way to say it, right? Because, yeah, they're not going to engage with you. They're not going to talk to you. They're not going to do those things. But actually, we sit on a certain kind of power in those moments, in that what they are aching for, what they are hoping for, is for you to prove them right. Because if they cut you off and you do all the things that they suspect you are so horrible of, you've given them the peace of being right. What is very disquieting is when you're so sure about something and then the person that you're so sure about doing those things doesn't live up to your evil expectations of them, right? Now, how do you make that happen? That's a much more challenging question, right? They're not talking to you. How can you figure those things out? How can you show them that you're not going to give in to them if they're not even talking to you? And yeah, that you're now a stranger to them. Your options are limited. But what I would say just in a conceptual basis is doing what you can to upset their expectations of your evilness are far more powerful than you know. And this is why, generally speaking, I will err on the side of things I'm not that comfortable with morally when dealing with somebody who is going to assume I'm going to be over-judgmental. The topic of whether you'll go to a gay wedding comes up a lot because it's, you were endorsing something that we don't stand for, and generally speaking, there's a lot of reasons not to do it. And I'm not saying I'm on one side or the other on that question in all cases. In fact, I'm definitely not that. But I'm saying it's a very challenging one that I struggle with. One of the things that would push me into showing up is I've been told that I'm a hateful person and you clearly hate Uncle Bob and your church does too. When you show up and just be a quiet observer, you're saying that, no, that's not it. I'm willing to be here because they're family, right? And somehow you make that, you do your best to make that known. Well, why did he come? He says it's not even a marriage. Why did he come? When you talk and somebody will talk to the back door, but Aunt Mary's wondering why you showed up. You say, you know what? I have to admit it was tough for me, but it's family. And I care more about the family than just being right. So I showed up. Now when it's your neighbor's, your distant neighbor's friend, and invites you to their gay marriage, and you're not like someone where it's going to be a lot of negative consequences of not going, I'm definitely not showing up. It's a whole different story, right? But there are times where you say, no, I'm saying more of my love. I'm not saying that this is a real marriage, And by the way, staying away could also be that sign of love. You get a call. If you show up, you will ruin the day, and it comes from the bride or the groom or whatever. And obviously, I'm being very specific in one thread, and you can apply this to a whole different ideas. Then you say, I will respect your wishes. I'm sorry those are your wishes. I wanted to be able to in some way share in your day, even if it's not something I morally support. But if this is what you want, I will respect your wishes. That breaks their assumption of you, right? Because you didn't get angry. They were expecting you to say, how dare you refuse to allow me to come? Right? So anything we can do that breaks their expectations of what we think they are, by being more forgiving, by being more loving, by being more caring, by not responding in kind to their hatred, it is actually surprising how often, how quickly that upsets their apple cart. Because people do not like it when what they are sure of the world turns out not to be true, right? In fact, that's what that's why people try so hard to be in their little bubbles, and our society's gone that way. We don't like hearing things that are outside what we want to hear. So what do? We only listen to people that are going to tell us what we want to hear. That's where we've kind of moved as a society, and it's troubling in a different way. But okay, let's not be those people. Let's be the ones that are constantly upsetting the apple cart and not necessarily telling them the things they don't want to hear, but forcing them to entertain these truths that they don't want to entertain. Not because we're shoving it down their throat, but through our actions. Going back to the thing, actions mean more than words, right? But it's hard, I think actually a great thing is if somebody cuts you off, and they don't want to talk to you anymore, and you find out something good happened in their life, send them a card. Say, I heard this great thing happen. I'm so happy to hear that that happened. I'm wishing you all the best. If you ever want to talk, I'm open. I understand that you don't want to, but if you ever change your mind, I'm here. Again, upsets the apple cart. Yeah. Not that, and again, I constantly want to go back to, none of these things are easy. I totally get it, you know? I got people in my life and I'm like, oh. All right, maybe one final good one before we wrap up for the night. Oh my gosh, we got down to the 5-minute mark. We actually might get the bomb to go off today if I want to ask one more. No, we're going to leave it at that. No one wants to hear the bomb go off. All right, let's wrap up with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, this week, through your Son, you will model for us the ultimate form of love and forgiveness. Help us to truly embrace that in our own lives, to be as selfless as you were selfless. That hanging on that cross, you did not get angry, you did not condemn, but you told your Heavenly Father, they know not what they do. And you welcomed the thief who asked for forgiveness into heaven. Help us to model that sort of love and forgiveness, to be vessels of peace and of love that makes your world a better place, even when it's only in the smallest of ways. We ask all of this through Christ our Lord and Savior. Amen. God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening.